Thanks, Sue, and delighted to be here and talk about issues that are dominating my life at the moment. And I don't necessarily mean that in a good way, but the appetite for public engagement, public participation, innovative citywide engagement, as well as local engagement in our metropolitan areas in the UK is taking off. It's partly precipitated by government, the coalition government, thinking that that is the good way to go. But it's also precipitated by the fact that there's a growing appetite on the part of the public, on the part of citizens, stakeholder groups, to have a voice in the process of change beyond traditional political democratic means. And so it's as much about the coalition government being seen to be doing something. Thankfully, we're in the last days of that government, just before the general election. But it's also about finding new ways that the public can engage with on their terms. And that's the critical thing here. And even though the elected representatives and the professional bodies like the architects and planners have not designed some of these new processes, nevertheless, they are learning fast the importance of those engagement processes and how they can be creative at designing new processes as well. I just have a few slides, mainly pictures, because we have predominantly an architecture audience, and they're more for context and hopefully to inspire some debate as well. What's happening in many cities in the UK and in fact beyond the UK is I suppose a feeling that traditional democratic fora are no longer truly representative of society and their needs and their views. If you look at voter turnout at local election, local municipality level in the UK, you're now talking about 30%, if you're lucky, probably averages of 20%, and certainly in some city areas, that's even lower. There's a feeling of disenfranchisement. Essentially, people are turned off by the traditional elected governmental system. They turned off by elected representatives. They turned off by party politics. It doesn't mean to say they're not interested in issues. It doesn't mean to say they're not interested in the future of their places, or indeed that the way that they will live and their children and grandchildren will live in the future. They're interested and passionate about all those things. They just don't like the current means on offer to them to engage conversation about that change. So if these traditional means are declining, there has to be something that fills that vacuum. At the same time, the pressure for change and responding to development needs is as great as ever. Population in the UK, for example, is forecast to grow by another 10% in the next 20 years. We are running out of space, if you believe some political parties. That's if you believe in the planning system and green belt policy, of course. Only 10% of the UK is built on. But there are issues about how you house people, what sort of developments do you proceed, whether you proceed with new towns and garden cities, which have been rolled out in terms of political announcement again. Whether they'll get built is another matter. But there are certainly pressures to build, and you can't cope with that pressure for development within our current cities. It goes beyond the cities into the rural areas and the urban fringe as well. So pressure for growth to meet needs, pressure for growth to meet economic conditions, given that the UK is only slightly out of recession, and different parts of the UK are faring much better than others in that regard. Those conditions make it ripe to say we need a new development program, a new building program, and for architects and planners to respond. That in turn, of course, is creating even more intense debate on the part of the public and residents about the means that they're given to have a say in those development choices that are being rolled out. It's not just about development. It's not just about building. We need to remember that it's just about places. It's about people's views about where they live, why they feel passionate or emotional about change in where they live and the places that they are familiar with. It doesn't mean to say that it's about a development project. It doesn't mean to say it's about a site plan. It just means to say that there is a need to engage the public on the future of their places that they understand and they are happy with. And that puts question marks really over the form of, say, the planning system that we have, which is very much about consultation on a plan, consultation on a development proposal. What if there's no plan? What if there's no development proposal? People will still need a conversation about change over long periods of time in the places that they're used to. The result of some of these pressure points is for the public to take to the streets. They are no longer just prepared to use the traditional consultation methods of consultation on a plan, consultation on a planning application. They are not prepared to use those means anymore. They are prepared to use direct action. Some of it is quite radical, but some of it is simply to be heard in a political system that they think is no longer open to hearing their views. And so we have protest movements going on weekly, almost daily, in relation to new housing development of whatever ilk that it might be, building over the green belt, building on any green land, because the public think it's green belt, which isn't actually the case, of course. We have moved from a system, certainly in the southeast of England, where we no longer talk about NIMBYism, not in my backyard attitudes, but banana, build absolutely nothing anywhere near anyone. And that is a mantra that's been fueled by some activists in the community, and it's also being used in election campaigns. There are several candidates standing in general election in a couple of weeks' time on this platform. So it's become quite a heated political issue, and the national parties, of course, having to react to this as well. It's not just about housing, it's not just about greenbelt, it's about high-speed rail, it's about airport development, it's about the future of our woodlands and forestry, it's the future of energy projects, it's the future of retail and commercial development. All of these things are needed for a future growing population, yet all of them have implications and consequences for the planning process and indeed the public's attitude and appetite to accept some of these development proposals. In some cases, it's gone even more radical. Tesco is the most unpopular retail chain in the UK at present, and for a variety of different reasons, and their stores are being burned down if they announce any new development schemes. It's got that radical. And this is in metropolitan areas of some cities. It's fueling a campaign against cloning identikit cities, identikit chain stores as well in some cities too. I was always told, even as a student, that it doesn't matter how much consultation you do, you can never do enough. You can never have enough. There's always an appetite for it. Once you let the consultation genie out of the bottle, you'll never fit it back in again. And we are moving from a process of consultation to participation. And increasingly, I think there's an appetite for engagement, which is a very different dynamic to the one that certainly traditional planning processes in the UK have been used to. In 2010, the coalition government came along and declared that they had invented something called the big society and localism. Big society is rather a damp squib, and David Cameron prefers not to be reminded of the big society because the public haven't bought that as a label. Volunteering for your own good at the time when we're cutting your jobs and public services. It was never going to go down that well. But localism, which was announced simultaneously, is going down very well. Localism isn't new, certainly academically it's not new, but he gave it a new spin. And from the pre-2010 election statement, the open source green paper, which announced this commitment to localism, here are some paragraphs which are quite relevant, that basically nobody can disagree with. The planning system is vital for a strong economy, for an attractive and sustainable environment, and for successful democracy. At present, the planning system in England achieves none of these goals. It's broken. That's actually not true, but it's a good political statement to make. We need a planning system that enables local people to shape their surroundings in a way that is also sensitive to the history and character of a given location. Place being at the forefront here, not site. And our conception of local planning is rooted in civic engagement and collaborative democracy as the means of reconciling economic development with quality of life. The plan system can play a major role in decentralizing power and strengthening society, sentiments that probably most of us can agree with. If you try and argue against these things, you can be pigeonholed as disagreeing with democracy in some ways. So, of course, even members of the planning profession were receptive to this notion as well. The legislation that came about, the biggest act of Parliament ever passed in Parliament's 1,000-year history, was the Localism Act, which was rolled out right across the UK, perversely as a form of centralism. You will have it, you can't decide against it. But localism delivers on some of those promises that were intended in 2010. But radical transformation. It transfers powers away from the municipalities directly into the hands of citizens. It doesn't give the citizens additional powers to those of local government. It removes the powers of local government and gives them directly to neighbourhoods and citizen forum. And it moves the power away from professionals in that process as well. Professional planners, having just agreed to the notion of localism, found very quickly that they were being sidelined as much as locally elected representatives of the municipalities as well. The new law allowed 21 random people in any community to come forward and set up their own neighbourhood group, their own neighbourhood forum. They didn't even have to be living in the locality to be eligible to be members of the 21. Who would be the 21? The first 21 members of the public through the door at the town hall would register themselves, and the town hall wouldn't be able to say no. They would have to legitimize those first 21 people. And not surprisingly, the public's reaction to all this has been one of absolute passion. They love the idea of getting their hands on power. They love the idea of being able to control their own streets. And we are talking about streets in some cases, just a handful of roads or streets or avenues in any given area, even within the city. And so high expectations about neighbourhood planning, about what localism was going to deliver for people. True democracy, perhaps in action. They would have the right to prepare development plans themselves. They would have the right to allocate automatic planning permission for developments in their area where there was a consensus. And rather controversially at the same time, the government allowed businesses to write statutory development plans for areas for the first time ever as well. True sign that the market also was being lined up to take some of that power alongside citizens. And do you detect a slight contradiction there between what perhaps developers and businesses might want and what citizens perhaps would want or not want for their area as well? Greater use of incentives were offered from the government. Small amounts of money were available to these neighbourhood forums to pursue their cause. But interestingly, the government said to the development industry, you need now not to talk to the town hall, you need to go directly to the citizens and bargain your developments directly with them. And that caused a bit of a shock to the system for the planners who, for the private sector planners and architects who had previously been used to the bulwark that was the town hall and the municipality, even if you had complaints about them, to suddenly realize you had to learn a new language altogether to engage with citizens directly without going through the planning committee, without going through the town hall. So incentives were put on the table. The idea that the development industry would have to dig deep to effectively bribe communities to accept their development schemes, and the communities being more than ready to list their wish lists about what they would like in return. So negotiation, bargaining, mediation suddenly became very important planning skills for architects and planners to learn, as well as civic engagement. All this has resulted in a frenetic pace of neighbourhood planning and localism in the UK. And it's been rolled out very successfully in rural areas of the UK, more than metropolitan areas. I think the whole system was designed probably for rural areas, because after all, the Conservative Party constituency is rural areas, not urban areas. So it's adapted quite well. Villages of 100, 200 people have come forward and they've prepared neighbourhood plans. And it's been a fraught exercise in some cases. And they've legitimised them through referenda of their villages as well. In urban areas, it's become more problematic. Who really represents a community, a multi-ethnic community of one part of a metropolitan area? And so there have been some tensions, conflicts between different people in the same city over who has the right to speak on behalf of the rest of the community. Exactly the same issue you might position in terms of elected representatives of municipalities. But there was an accepted legitimacy that they were elected to perform that duty, not directly in this case. So in some cases this worked, in some cases it's been a bit questionable. Unfortunately, what's happened is another arm of the coalition government has looked at this in a very suspicious way, namely giving rights to citizens, giving more power to citizens. If we do that, they'll come up with one decision. They'll say no to developments because they don't want development in their backyard. They have this banana mentality, after all, certainly in the southeast. So if we give the power to the people, what happens if the people say no to economic growth? What happens if the people say no to infrastructure developments? Then we're back to square one at not being able to deliver a successful economy. So we used to have some politicians then in the coalition government coming forward with their own take on what they think localism really is all about. This is Nick Bowles, MP, who said that people who oppose development in their area are hysterical, scaremongering, latter-day Luddites. Believe it or not, he was the Minister for Planning when he made that announcement. And he takes a different view, an alternative view of the role of planning and place in government. You step forward two different views of planning then in the coalition government. The coalition, more democracy, greater engagement side of things, and then the economic growth, the deregulation, the neoliberal agenda on the other side. And it was quite late in the day that ministers recognized that if they truly roll out democratic engagement in this sort of way, the public are not going to buy economic growth. They're going to reject neoliberalism at all costs. So what we had, essentially, what we have had since, certainly in urban areas, is a different sort of localism. The new Secretary of State for Communities calls it muscular localism. Namely, if communities decide to want to reject development proposals in their backyard, they are not allowed to. If you're going to make a decision as a community, as a neighbourhood forum, you only have one decision to make. You can say yes, and you can say yes to more, but you can't say no. So muscular localism has been rolled out into urban areas, which effectively gives a complete carte blanche to saying yes for new development proposals. And that is causing a backlash, as you could imagine, from members of the public who thought they were getting the promise of greater democracy, but actually it is tainted by the fact that the agenda has already been set. It's my last slide. My own view on this is I have mixed feelings about localism. I can see how it works in certain contexts and in certain areas. In metropolitan areas, I do not think it works very well. Municipal government hasn't disappeared. Municipal plan making hasn't disappeared. The agendas have already been created even before the public have been given the option of having a say on it. And what that is in the danger of doing is creating false impressions, raising expectations and then dashing them. That has a worse effect on democratic involvement in change and development processes than even the traditional elected governmental means. I am more in favour of creating a city-wide dialogue, but using alternative, innovative and creative means. Terry Farrell, who you will know, has come up with the Farrell Review for government, a different arm of government yet again, last year, where he advocated the implementation of urban rooms in every metropolitan area. There would be an opportunity, a bit like this space, where people could come together to talk about change, could talk about their future, could look at historically how places had changed, could look about the plans for the future. You could use film, you could use photography, you could use art and other creative means to get the public fired up to talk about change, rather through a dry, boring, draft, wordy consultation strategy, which the plan system is more known for. So find innovative ways to engage the public, and they will respond. Last year I curated a City Futures exhibition in Newcastle over 3 weeks, which drew in 2,500 to 3,000 people in the city to talk about the next 50 years. It was very well. The planners in the municipality were totally mystified as to why I had done this, because they said, we have a local plan. We ask the public every 5 years to get involved. It was a totally different process. The architecture profession got really involved with this as well. They can see the creative opportunities of using these forms of techniques as well. So we need a form of engagement that inspires people, that gets people interested in their communities and surroundings in a way that they are interested in, but the current political system doesn't give them that opportunity to do at the moment. Moving beyond individual plots of land, individual plans and development proposals. Can the architecture and planning professions provide that sort of role? Are they the best communicators? Are they the best mediators to perform this role? I have my suspicions, to be honest, for people who are trained in a particular way of thinking and perhaps have not been trained into open dialogue, discursive arenas and greater democracy. So perhaps the mediation needs to come from other sources to find ways of joining up the different professions and different communities as well. And then my final point is this. We have found that in the UK, one of the best public institutions to perform that mediation role are actually the universities. The universities performing its civic engagement role in a much more prominent way, giving something back to the city in which that university is located. The city has an enormous footprint in the university, has enormous real estate implication, has enormous economic implication, but it has a social duty and a democratic duty as well. So it's the universities that are stepping forward and facilitating these exercises in new democracy and new engagement. And that, I think, is the shape of what the core cities in the UK are going to be doing in the future. New dynamics and relationships between the universities, the cities, the economic growth bodies and the utility companies. And the public will be part of that process as well. And at that point, I'll finish.